Welcome to the David Bradley Show with your host, David Bradley.
Hey everybody, how you doing? And as you can see, we're still in the spooky setup. So we're going to do this should be the third show of our Halloween special, and I find it very intriguing, and nothing is more spookier than real life serial killers. And I figured, and my daughter Annabelle Lee hooked me up with this gentleman, and I am just curious as I'll get out. We only did like a 2-minute talk before I started the show. So we're going to find out a lot of fascinating things because people love how the real killers out there and a lot of the knowledge that goes on with trying to figure out why they did what they did and all this other good stuff. So we're going to sit down and we're going to talk to Mr. Jordan Cook, who is probably the he's got to be at least in the top 5, top 7, something like that, of private serial killer memorabilia collector. Hey, Jordan, how you doing, bud?
What's going on, David? How are you?
I'm tired, man.
yeah, I hear you. Tough is life, right?
It's nothing but work, dude.
Yeah, never ends.
Never ends. So I'm going to ask you this one question, and then we're going to talk. We're going to have some fun with this. What got you started in collecting?
Okay, so that's probably the top question that I'm always
asking. That's the top question right there, man.
Come to my house and see all this or see the stuff that I post on my Facebook or Instagram. But so just a little background about me. I started a company called True Crime Collective 4 or 5-ish years ago. Basically just started out as a clothing line, printing T-shirts such as this, featuring infamous serial killers. And it took off to an extent pretty fast. And through that, I met a lot of very interesting people,
right?
People that collected, this kind of stuff. Now, I've been into true crime and serial killers and that since I was a kid. But, I knew that these items, were out there, but I didn't know, exactly how to get your hands on them. I figured most of them, they probably are just in museums and that kind of thing. But
I was thinking, like a lot of these would be like in the police storage rooms, I didn't really think that they would actually get out on the open market, so that's why I was so fascinated by this.
Right. And there's certain items, that are like, if it's a case like, the Zodiac killer, where it's an ongoing case, it hasn't been solved. All those letters that, the Zodiac wrote to the police, like those would never get released until that case has been closed.
Right.
Now, with that being said, all these killers who have been convicted and they spent many years in jail, on death row, whatever. These guys had pen pals. They had hundreds of pen pals. John Gacy said at one point that he had over 1,000 people that he wrote to on a regular basis.
I wonder how many marriage proposals he's got, because I've read where these killers and stuff get proposals while they're in jail and stuff.
Oh, I mean, 100%. I mean, look at Charlie Manson. He got married while he was in prison. Ted Bundy, he was another one. He got married while he was on trial. So like there's a term for that. It's called hybristophilia. And I actually just did a TikTok video about it. I started doing TikToks not too long ago, and my channel kind of like took off. Like almost 50,000 followers on there right now. But I actually just did a video about hybristophilia, and it's basically just that, like, why are people so drawn to people that commit heinous crimes? Like, if you look at Richard Ramirez, when he was on trial, he had women lining up outside the courthouse every single day he was on trial just to get in, to get a glimpse of him. And if they did get in, these girls they were passing him love notes. They were flashing him their tits when he would look over at them, like stuff like that. And Bundy was the same way. And you can go look at interviews from like during those trials, during Ramirez's trial and Bundy's trial, of them interviewing women outside of the courthouse. And they're asking like, why are you here? And they're all just like, they're almost like in a daze where they're just like, I don't know, but I'm just so drawn to this person. And the term, the hybristophilia, it's just kind of like, that, why are you drawn to somebody that committed such heinous crimes? And a lot of it, it's just like the mystique around it. A lot of it, it's like, based off of childhood trauma. Some of it's based on, they think like, oh, this person could protect me, but he would never do this to me, type of thing. And it's all really just a delusion. But it is very interesting. And I just obtained quite a few Jeffrey Dahmer items. And I was going through them, and a lot of what I got was his prison mail. And I found, I was going through them the other day, reading them, and one was like it was like an 8-page long love letter from this guy to Jeffrey Dahmer, saying that he feels his soul, and that he, pictures the things he did, and that he wants to do them with him, and that he's in love with him, and that they're soulmates, and it's wild. It's really wild. They have this fancy scientific term for it, but in the end, it's like, you can say whatever you want or diagnose it however you want, but at the end of the day, like, it's really one of those things that you'll never really be able to truly explain. Like, why people are so drawn. Like, why would a woman want to marry a guy that slaughtered, raped children, other women? You know what I mean? Like, what's the draw? What's the attraction here? Like, a lot of women thought Bundy and Ramirez were super good looking guys, but I mean, that's
I've always heard that
physical attraction, like, it's got to go deeper than that. I would think, anyway. But it's almost a celebrity status too, because these guys are kind of, in a way, celebrities. At least they were. There's never going to be another great serial killer like, the Dahmers and the Gacy's and the Bundys and the Ramirez's. But back then, it was a celebrity status that these guys had. Their trials were nationally televised. So these women, they were, how women and men are both drawn to celebrities. So in a way, it was just kind of like a macabre celebrity to them, and it was very risque, and people like that kind of wow factor. And so that, I guess, had something to do with it. But
I wonder if like Ed Gein, because Ed Gein was back in the 50s?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, he was back in the 50s.
I wonder if he had that kind of same thing,
Yeah, I don't know, because that was, that was one of the first, he wasn't like the first serial killer by any means, but he was one of the first where it got, a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And, he was one of the only serial killers, at least in this country, that won the insanity defense, because, and I think that it came with the time period that he was from, because people were just that was before like the big serial killer explosion of like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where there was 500 active serial killers in this country alone. And it seemed like almost every year or every month, even, these guys were like being exposed, guys that were in the same era as Bundy and Ramirez and Kemper and Herbert Mullen and all those guys. But back then, during Ed Gein's time, it was like, wait, he did what? He made belts out of what? He made furniture out of what?
He had the whole, I think he was wearing women's facial mask and all that other stuff.
Yeah, he had a bodysuit. He had like a tit suit that was made out of women's breasts that he would just like strap on. He had a belt made out of nipples. Just all the shit that he had in his house. And back then, that was like unheard of. By the 70s and 80s, people were a little bit more normalized by these type of killers and the intensity of their crimes. But back then, people were like, dumbfounded, like they couldn't wrap their heads around it. So it was easier for him to win the insanity defense, because back then it was just so like, they're like, this guy was doing all this shit. He had to be insane.
Oh yeah. He had to be crazy.
No other explanation for it. So Ed Gein lived out the rest of his life in a mental institution. He was never let out, but he never went to prison. And there's a lot of serial killers, I think, that should have gotten, like, I think Dahmer should have gotten the insanity defense.
Because it was kind of insane, because I remember the stories and everything about him, and it was just how he was doing things and keeping things in the freezer and disposing of the bodies and all that stuff. I mean, it was an intelligence level, but there was some insanity there to me.
Yeah, and I mean, Dahmer wasn't dumb. He actually had a significantly high IQ. I believe his IQ was like 120 or 130.
Yeah.
So he wasn't dumb by any means, but he the things he was doing, it just like, to me, I don't feel like anybody that's on the spectrum of being sane could do. I mean, this guy at one point had two bodies in his bathtub that he was just showering on top of while they were like in his bathtub. I mean, the guy was.
See, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was cutting holes in dead victims and having sex with the corpses with the wounds in their skin. That doesn't really seem sane to me. I don't think anybody like, and a lot of people are like, well, he knew what he was doing. He knew that what he was doing was wrong. And it's like, just because he knows that it was wrong doesn't mean that that he's sane. Because
Well, I mean, I always felt like most of these serial killers and stuff, I always felt like it was like something drove them there, something. It was like an impulse, but it was a repeated impulse to just do a certain thing.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of argument about that. There's a lot of argument about if were they born with it? Were they made that way by their surroundings, being abused as a child, head injuries, frontal lobe injuries at a young age when the frontal lobe is still in development? That is a big key that people have talked about for years, because the frontal lobe is like the determining factor of like right versus wrong, your empathy and guilt, and that kind of thing. And a lot of serial killers have that in common, where they had the major one, if not multiple, frontal lobe injuries while they were still developing. So that's something that's talked, like Gacy. He's one of those. He had like two or three. His first one, he was like, he fell off a swing, and it was like a big, thick wooden swing, and it came around and cracked him right in the head. And then his dad was abusive as hell and beat him, beat the brakes off of him multiple times, to the point that he, didn't wake up for like 2 days. Yeah. And a lot of people, talk about that, myself included. I think that that's a big thing with Gacy, that was a big factor with him, is that his frontal lobe was so damaged while he was such a young child and his brain was still developing, that he just didn't get the chance to like get those traits of right versus wrong. So he felt no guilt towards any victims. But then there's guys like Dahmer, who you can tell like he had a lot of guilt about what he did. Like when he was on trial, he wouldn't wear his glasses because he didn't want to look at the victims' families. And he made this big apology. He went on to talk, extensively. He found God because, he couldn't deal with what he had done. And Dahmer, he had to get completely blackout drunk to commit any of his crimes. He never committed any of his crimes sober. So I think he had a lot of guilt. But then there's guys like Bundy and Gacy and Ramirez who they didn't give a fuck, because they didn't even think that they did anything wrong. And in their minds, like they were like, and then there's guys like Gary Ridgway, who, he killed like 50 some sex workers. And he claims like, oh, I was doing society a service by ridding the world of these people, because he was a religious freak. And, he thought that, sex workers were sinners and were bad and they needed to be exterminated. Right. So he was another one of those delusional ones that felt like, oh, I didn't do anything wrong. I was doing everybody a big favor by getting rid of these people. Yeah. But yeah, going back to that, to the frontal lobe thing. And then another thing that I actually just did another a video on recently too, was about a theory that I've always held some belief in, if not, extensive belief in, and that's the theory of lead exposure. Because if you look at the lead emissions from back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. Oh,
it was all lead paint everywhere, dude.
Paint, lead emissions from vehicles, from the gas before it became unleaded. Right. If you look at it, if you put that graph, like if you put the rise and fall of lead emissions on a chart with the years, it lines up perfectly with just a 20-year difference to when the spike in serial killers happened. So these people are getting exposed as children while their brains are still developing. The lead emission, it causes basically your brain not to develop right. So then by the time these guys become adults, their brains have been impacted so much by all the lead emissions that they become violent criminals. And that's not just with serial killers, that's with, other violent criminals as well. But it's literally like there's a chart, and I posted the chart, and it lines up perfectly with like an 18 or 20-year difference.
So
And
that would be the whole spike of all the serial killers coming out and everything.
Correct, because then it follows it with the 18, 20-year difference. That's from when they were kids to adults and started committing the crimes. Because a lot of, if you look into it, a lot of serial killers, their crimes started like in their late teens, early 20s, into their mid 20s, depending on how long it took them to get caught. But then that same chart falls off like at the same time, 20 years after the lead emissions are taken out of paint and out of gas. And then now, we don't have that many serial killers. Yes, there's still serial killers out there. And there's, of course, other factors that go into why there's not so many. And that's because people get caught very easily now. I think a lot of people get caught for their first crime now before they're able to become serial killers. So if I were to, be like, oh, I'm going to be a serial killer and I'm going to go out, it's like I commit my first murder and I'm caught. Right? Like I'm caught immediately. So I don't even get the chance to become a serial killer because it's very hard to get away with things now.
Well, with all the video cameras everywhere, man. I mean, video cameras are everywhere.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
You can't do nothing. I mean,
video cameras, you got cell phone pings where, if they ping me in a specific area at the time that this murder was committed, and I was like loosely, a suspect, and they're like, oh, well, he was right here when all this was happening, that's our guy. So I think that's a big factor in it too. And that's kind of going back to what I was saying about the whole lead theory is like, that's definitely a factor. It's not the only factor, but I think it was definitely a factor and why there was such a rapid spike. Cause it went from, I think it was like the 1960s, there was like 200 or 300 active serial killers in the world. And that rose in the 70s and through the 80s to like over 800. Like it almost tripled in just a decade. So what's the explanation for that?
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, that's a hell of a theory.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what about that time frame in like other countries? Is there like reports of the same or
very similar? There's just not as many like studies done on it. Like, and even the studies, like there's been extensive studies in the US about this theory, but for whatever reason, people just kind of like, they disregard it. Like they're just, there's scientific fact and scientific studies that are linking these things and proving that it is a factor. But for some reason, a lot of people just don't want to accept it and they just kind of brush it off, In Europe, I didn't really look into Europe's numbers and statistics on that, but I did try to a little bit, and it didn't seem like there was much. I don't think Europe, those other countries were really looking into it as hard as the U.S., but the U.S. always has seemed to have more serial killers and mass murderers than other countries. So I don't know if that has to do with maybe there were higher lead emissions over here than over there. I don't really know.
Yeah, because I know, well, I mean, you've got the very famous one, the Jack the Ripper.
Right.
But that was, was there automobiles when he was doing that? I can't remember.
I don't know.
I can't remember what time frame that was.
No, I think that was way before that. That was in like the early to mid 1800s, I want to say.
Yeah.
An expert on Jack the Ripper. But yeah,
but you don't really hear much about Jack the Ripper anymore. I mean, it used to be a big thing. They made some movies, stuff like
they
that.
did a show recently about, it was like something like Catching the Ripper or something where they thought that we were it was like one of those shows like the Finding Bigfoot shows where they'll do 10 seasons of them never catching or finding out anything relevant. So it was one of those. But a lot of people have tried to link Jack the Ripper and H.H. Holmes. Do you know who H.H. Holmes was?
Just barely.
So
I've heard a couple of stories.
He was like America's first serial killer. He was the one in Chicago during the World Fair. I think it was like 1835, where he had a hotel and he basically like booby trapped his whole hotel with trap doors and traps and just different kind of. It was like a murder castle, is what they called it.
Yeah.
And he had all these chutes where he would dump these bodies down in the basement. They claimed he killed dozens of people. But people have tried to link H.H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper and say that they were the same person. That H.H. Holmes was Jack the Ripper over in Europe, and then he fled over to the U.S. and then committed his murders here. There's really not any like real evidence to make a real argument about it. There are certain things like the time frames that line up, but as far as like evidence or anything like that, there really isn't anything. So
wasn't H.H. Holmes like a doctor or something?
He was, yeah. He actually he was I think he was kind of like a, what's the word for it? He wasn't like a real doctor.
No,
like,
okay.
He was like a fake it till you make it kind of doctor.
Yeah.
And he ran a pharmacy and I think he practiced at like at a mental hospital in the Philadelphia area for a little bit, but he wasn't like an actual real doctor.
Right.
And he opened a hotel. If you're a doctor, I don't really see the point of having to go into the hotel business. My opinion.
But I mean, to do that and take the hotel and put, trap doors and all that, I mean, that had to have taken a little bit of time for him to set up this whole thing.
Yeah, time and money. And they said that he would consistently hire and fire his contractors.
Yeah.
Like, so he'd hire a contractor, have them build one little section, get rid of them and bring in a new team, because he didn't want any one person knowing the layout of the entire thing and exactly what he was doing.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I mean, how do you pass that off? Laundry chute? I mean,
yeah, laundry chute with a bunch of metal spikes at the bottom.
Yeah,
something like that. But the thing about H.H. Holmes too is from what I know, there's really not any actual like proof that he had these traps and stuff in his hotel. Nobody lived to see it. It was just kind of going off of what he told people about it, and then the hotel was torn down. So There were never photographs. There was never any eyewitnesses. And, we all know a lot of serial killers, they lie to boost their persona and their notoriety about their crimes.
Yeah.
So we don't even know, like, this guy could have been making this whole thing up. We have no idea.
Well, it's like back in the Western days, when they had these gunslingers that traveled town to town, and they would brag about how many men they've killed in gunfights,
Right.
And they probably never fired a weapon at another person in their life.
Exactly. And then, there's a story along with that where it's like, if I was like, yeah, David, I did this. And then you go and tell somebody, like, hey, this guy Jordan, he did this, this, and this. And then they tell somebody that I did all this other stuff. And the story builds from there. It's just a rumor mill.
Oh, yeah.
So, word of mouth back then was all that we had. There was no cell phones. There were no radios. So back in those days,
there was a lot of embellishment too.
A lot of embellishment. Exactly. The perfect term for it. And one person takes the story they heard and they gas it up a little bit more. And then the next person does the same thing. And then next thing you know, you have this ridiculous story, and 95% of it never even happened. So,
yeah. That's what's
reputation was everything. So.
Well, that's what I always wondered about with the serial killers, and everything. I mean, the only thing you really heard, you didn't hear nothing about this person before the serial killers, before this, little reign of terror that they bring about. And then they get caught, they go to trial. All the stories, they never really focus on what did these people do for a living? What was their background? What made them who they were,
Right.
Besides the serial killing part. You don't know.
Yeah, I mean, some you do, some you don't. Like a lot of a lot of serial killers, they will go into the whole like, oh, he was such a normal guy, he was successful, like Bundy. Like there's one about Bundy where like how many times can you hear like, oh, he was a college student? Who gives a fuck? Like just because you're
Everybody goes to college.
means that you're not a piece of shit. You know, like, oh, he was into politics. I mean, we were not going to get into politics, but politicians don't have the best reputation. So it's like they use these things about these people based on what they did to be like, oh, I can't believe that he killed 50 some women because he was a college student and going to law school and all this stuff. And it's like, just because you do that doesn't mean that in your free time you're not out murdering people or capable of murdering people. And you know, Gacy, he owned a business. He had a contracting business that was super successful. And you know, people will talk about that too. Like, you know, oh, these guys, they were successful. And Gacy was also like very into politics in the Chicago area.
Yeah.
And yeah, so like just because you had a job doesn't mean that you can't be a serial killer. But then
that's what worried me. Because look, I was born and raised redneck Southern boy, right? My dad was in the woods hunting. He took me. I learned how to hunt, fish, do all this stuff. And then I started hearing about serial killers and how they were like talking about they were mean to animals or they killed animals when they were little and stuff. And I'm like, I go hunting rabbits and squirrels all the time. Am I like a serial killer in the making?
Yeah, I mean, like serial killer in the making right now just because I hunt. Yeah. And the whole animal abuse thing, like that's one that's, you know, a somewhat often like comes up as a factor of, you know, they look at things. There was a whole theory, like I'm sure you've seen the show Mindhunter, right?
No, I haven't.
No. Okay. So Mindhunter was basically based off of this guy, John Douglas, who came up with an FBI profiling on how to identify a serial killer and how to catch these guys by looking at their crimes. Like,
right.
Okay, he mutilated them. He did this to them. Okay. So we're looking for a guy that was abused. He tortured animals as a kid. He was an arsonist. You know, and like stuff like that. But there was a theory that John Douglas believed in, and there was a guy named Jonathan McDonald who came up with a theory. It was called the McDonald Triad, and the McDonald Triad was three things. It was three factors basically that could link somebody to like being a violent criminal in later in life, and that was animal abuse at a young age.
Right.
That was arson at a young age, and then it was the third one was like frequent bedwetting at a young age. And he came up with this theory and said like if these guys have these three things in common as a child, they are more likely to grow up to become violent criminals. And John Douglas for a while practiced like basically used that in his profiling. And in some ways it worked, in some ways it was a little bit inconclusive. But for a while, that McDonald Triad theory was widely used by like FBI profilers.
Yeah,
so it held some weight. You know, I think now it's kind of like they don't really see it as relevant at this point. But back then it was used quite a bit. So and I mean, guys like John Douglas, I mean, he changed the game when it came to catching serial killers and identifying serial killers. He coined the term serial killer. You know, because back in the days of like, you know, like Ed Kemper and, you know, like Pee Wee Gaskins, guys like that came way before the big serial killer explosion in the US, at least. Like cops and feds, they didn't even, they wouldn't even believe that somebody could do all these random crimes. Like, even Ramirez, like when they were looking for Ramirez for the longest time, they were like all these crimes were happening and none of the cops, like there was one cop telling them, yo, I think this is the same guy. Yeah. And they're like, no, there's no way. There's no way that one person could be out just killing all these random people that he doesn't even know. So, and then cops also didn't work with each other. Like one jurisdiction over here where this guy was killed, and then this jurisdiction over here where this guy was killed, they were killed by the same guy, but the cops refused to work with each other or tell each other about the crimes because they're like, nah, this is our case. It was like an ego thing. Like, no, this is ours. We'll handle it. You handle your shit over here. And so the fact that like they didn't even believe that one person could do these crimes, and then they wouldn't talk to each other and say, yo, these two murders were done exactly the same.
Right.
If they would have just worked together, they could have solved these things a lot quicker. But that term serial killer, it just wasn't coined until, John Douglas kind of came in and was like, identifying these guys like, no, this is the same guy. This is the same guy that's doing this. And, it might be in different areas. Yeah, he doesn't know any of them, but that's what makes him a serial killer.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I remember, back in the day, man, it was like they didn't talk to each other. They were very, very territorial over their own jurisdiction.
Yep.
And if the feds came in, hell, they'd even fight the feds for, jurisdiction.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, they still do to an extent. There's local sheriffs and police departments. If there's a crime and the FBI tries to get involved, they try to be like, no, this is ours.
Yeah.
This happened here. We're investigating it. Keep it moving, but the FBI is obviously going to come in and be like, no, this is ours. Fuck off.
Yeah.
Get out of our way. But so that still does happen. But that back then, before, cell phones and before there was a lot more communication, they didn't communicate at all. So
because
10 crimes in 10 different areas.
Well, I was trying to think because I remember, and you probably know the whole story, but I remember seeing something where in California there was a guy that was killing up in the very top part of California, and then they started noticing other killings towards the middle of California,
right?
And then he went all the way down to the bottom, and then he come back and settled in LA. And I can't remember the name of the guy, but it was like it went on for years and years, and they could never figure it out because they never talked to each other.
Right. I think the Zodiac was one of those. He committed crimes. I don't think it was like north to all the way south, but he committed some in San Francisco, and then he kind of moved a little bit south of there at one point. And Ramirez, he was kind of the same way. Like most of his crimes were based in the LA area, but then he went up to NorCal and committed one or two up there. But he was a big one that it wasn't until they finally started communicating and realized oh, we're finding footprints at all these crime scenes, and it's the same pair of what did he wear? Whatever it was like the same pair of sneakers, and it wasn't something super common back then. And that was how they figured out oh, it's a size 11 such and such. This has got to be the same guy. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that you say that's interesting to me how they do all that stuff. I mean, there's so many things along that serial killer line that are just multifaceted as far as my fascination with them. The killing first, how they planned it, how they done it, and then the whole area of them trying to catch him, and it's of course, you look at a lot of it, and some of it is celebrated more on them trying to catch the guy. And it's some people are man, I hope they never catch him,
Right.
It just gets crazy.
It does. Yeah. And, there's never going to be I personally don't think there's ever going to be a big story like that anymore. No. Not in somebody that just started yesterday and gets caught, in a few years or whatever. I know they just caught that Long Island serial killer, the Gilgo Beach killer. They think they caught him anyway. So that, but a lot of his crimes were committed in the late 90s and early 2000s. They were just, now figuring out who he was. And then there was the Golden State Killer that they just caught a few years back, Joseph D'Angelo. And shit, he's an old man now. That all took place in the 70s and 80s, and they finally caught him based off of one of those genealogy kits.
I read about that.
Yeah, the swab to your ancestry and everything, and that's how they caught him, because one of his descendants did a thing and it matched, and they tracked him back, and sure as shit they caught him. But once again, those crimes were all committed decades ago. They just now caught him. So,
yeah, see, I wondered sometimes, is that actually why they come up with that genealogy swab?
I think the same thing. It's just one of the same, in the same realm of like the facial recognition and the fingerprint stuff on your phone and all that. It's like, was that more so that they could have more people's DNA on file?
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest here. Probably.
Oh, yeah.
You
can't get by with nothing no more.
No, you really can't. You really can't. Between the cell phones and the surveillance cameras everywhere, no.
Well, I mean, just in my neighborhood alone, there's probably, I live in a cul-de-sac, and the main entrance into it is probably maybe 700 feet long. I've probably got 11 houses on the street and then the cul-de-sac. Mm-hmm. I guarantee you, every daggone one of them's got a Ring doorbell.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Because mine goes off constantly. Somebody just pull into the neighborhood and it goes off.
Right.
So, I mean, you can get vehicle.
I mean, there was a case a couple years ago that they caught somebody. I don't remember. It wasn't like some big thing, but I believe the guy like killed his wife or killed his girlfriend or something, and they caught him because they had one of those Alexas, and they were able to pull a recording from the Alexa. Alexas aren't supposed to record.
Yeah.
That's not supposed to be a thing, but that's how they caught him, because they went back, like they saw the Alexa in the house when they were, doing what they do. And, I think they were claiming like the husband or boyfriend claimed it was a suicide or something, but then they saw that and they're like, oh, well, let's see what we can pull from the Alexa. And sure as shit, they pulled this whole recorded argument between them, and you can hear him fucking killing her on the voice recording. So once again, just like we said with the phones, the Ring cameras, Alexas, there's a reason I don't have one. Now, I mean, I'm sure this thing right here is recording everything I'm saying right now anyway, but with the Alexas too, it's like, I always felt like, I don't know about those things. I feel like they're recording like every conversation I have in the house or whatever. And sure enough, the feds were literally able to pull a voice recording, a conversation, and they caught the guy that way. They found the whole argument, and they could hear her being beaten, and then there you go. It's a murder.
Well, I can guarantee you pretty much 85% guarantee you, when we get off of doing this show, I'll pull up my phone on Facebook and stuff about serial killers will start coming up on my phone.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Anything we talk about. We could start talking about Timberland boots.
Yeah.
And I pull up my phone and go on Facebook. There's the first ad on there is probably going to be about Timberland boots. Yeah. So, yeah.
And the closest shoe store where you can get them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They're always listening. The Facebook and all the ads, Instagram, all the social media shit, they're all listening, and it's not comforting at all, No,
it's not. What about the Craigslist killer?
I don't know a whole lot about him, to be honest with you. He's one that I never really researched a whole lot.
I didn't either. I mean, I'd heard about it, and I think, didn't somebody make a movie about it or something?
I believe so, or loosely based off of it. But
yeah,
some of those movies that they make off these guys, they're like the Lifetime movies, and they're so corny. I don't even bother watching them. It's like you see it and you're like I'll be scrolling through one of my 10 streaming services, and I'm like, oh, like I didn't know they made a movie about that. And then I see in the bottom corner it's like Lifetime, and I'm like,
well, of course,
not even going to entertain watching that. Yeah. But I should look into him more, because he was definitely prolific, with the time period and everything, and his method, like finding people on Craigslist and doing it that way. But yeah,
I can't even remember how many he actually killed.
I want to say it was between 7 and 10. Something.
Now,
like
what actually starts the serial killer status? Is it 2 or more?
3 or more.
3 or more. Okay. Or more.
Yeah, and they have to be. It can't be like I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of people I know. They piss me off and I blow them away.
Yeah.
It's not that. That's a mass murderer or a spree killer. That's not a serial killer. A serial killer, it's like 3 completely different people in completely different scenarios. And most of the like serial killers don't kill people that they know. Like they don't kill they're killing random people. They pick a victim based on whatever it meets their criteria, or just random. Like Richard Ramirez, he used to just prowl neighborhoods and be like, that house looks cool, I'm going to go wreak havoc in here and kill whoever's inside. Whereas guys like Dahmer, he kind of hunted his victims. He'd go out to the bars, bring them back. He was a little bit more methodical than say Ramirez was. And same with Bundy, he was one that he would stalk victims based on the color of their hair and how they looked. He had like a type. But yeah, it's three or more, and it's never it's never in like a a setting of like your family, or a spur of the moment thing. A room full of people piss you off and you blow them all away.
Yeah,
something like that. So yeah,
that's what I was curious about, because I mean, you hear all the time, serial killers. I mean, if you was born in the 80s and 90s, you grew up on serial killers.
Sure.
Sure. And you never really knew how many and all that other stuff about what actually gave them that label.
Right.
I sound like a damn country hick. Gave them that label of actual serial killers.
Yeah. Yep. It's always
because I think
over an extended period of time.
Didn't the Zodiac killer? Wasn't he given? He got his name through like newspaper or something like that.
Yeah, because he was writing like ciphers to the police. Like he'd write letters to the police, basically saying, this is the Zodiac speaking. I just did this, or I'm going to do this, and then he had these ciphers with all these Zodiac symbols.
Right.
And actually, one of those ciphers was like completely unsolved until a year or so ago, that some couple in Australia cracked one of the codes, and I can't remember exactly what it said. It wasn't anything super interesting, but they finally like cracked one after all these years. But yeah, he would send in these ciphers, and they were all Zodiac symbols, so that's how he got. But he coined himself like the Zodiac killer. Like he would like them be like, "This is the Zodiac speaking." You know? So,
and I think. Yeah, and just based on all that stuff, I mean, he had to have an IQ to develop that cipher and everything.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people think that he was a cop, just based on the way the crimes were committed, the taunting of the police, but knowing how to not be tracked down, the fact that he got away as long as he did. Well, he's never been caught. I think he's probably dead. He's probably dead, or was thrown in jail for a completely different crime, and was never linked to all the other crimes. But yeah, I don't know. He's a strange one. I've always just had an inkling that he was a cop. There's been plenty of police officer serial killers over the years. I mean, we were just talking Joseph D'Angelo. He was a cop. Yeah. There was a guy here in Florida. I can't remember his name, but he was. There's a place down in south of me. It's a town called Fort Pierce, and there's a tree there called the Devil Tree, and the Devil Tree is like significant because this serial killer that was a cop, he took his victims to this tree, would tie them to the tree, and torture them on it. It was just this big old oak tree, and then there was a couple that he ended up burying like directly beneath that tree. So, and like in that section of woods there, it's where he was, doing all this shit. But yeah, he was a cop too. So there's been plenty of police officer serial killers over the years, and police officers, they have an upper hand as serial killers because they know what information's coming in. Yeah. They know exactly how to like avoid getting caught just based on other cases that they've worked. So yeah, it's very methodical for cop killers like that to kind of operate, because they know the ins and outs. They know how to avoid being caught. They know details about the case, like, oh, they found this shit. I gotta steer clear of that and do this better next time. Otherwise, I'm gonna get caught. Shit like that. And
they would actually know who was in that region too, or patrolling that particular area. Yep. And know their rounds and everything. So
know where cops were going to be and where they weren't going to be.
Yeah, because I don't even know if cops do rounds anymore like they used to do. Because back in the 60s,
I'm sure they do. in certain neighborhoods, but not just like regular, just like
yeah,
that,
because back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, I mean, sometimes you could set your watch by them.
Right.
You know, they had
control. You didn't have people that could just pick up the phone and call,
yeah,
wherever they were. You didn't have cameras, so they were out looking for shit that was happening because, like, there could be some woman getting attacked on the street and she ain't got a cell phone. There's not many people around. Nobody's got a camera. There's no Ring camera to catch what's going on.
Yeah.
And somebody else. Yeah. So that was, I'm sure, I mean, I'm not a fucking cop by any means, but I'm sure that was definitely a factor. And then, I was going to say too, like there was kind of piggybacking off of, the whole like cops that were serial killers. Like if you know much about Ed Kemper, he was the co-ed killer out in Santa Cruz, Sacramento, California. But he was like good friends with cops. Like he would go to this cop bar like all the fucking time and talk to the cops and get information about, just pick their brains, like, about cases. And he learned from them, like how to get away with shit. He would ask them about details about the crimes that he was committing because they didn't know that he was the one committing them, and get information about like what they know so far about the crimes, if they have any leads, if they, that kind of stuff. So, he just kind of played that role of like, oh, I'm going to be friends with these cops just to kind of have them in my pocket to get information.
Just a neighborhood drinking buddy.
Basically.
That's actually kind of smart.
He was very intelligent. He's still alive, but he had an IQ of like 145.
Wow.
He was like genius level. He was extremely intelligent. And there have been a lot of serial killers that were intelligent like that. And then there's been a lot too that were fucking stupid. But yeah, he was one that was, he knew what he was doing. He was smart. Very smart.
I would think the stupid ones get caught quick.
Like guys like Dahmer, he had 17 victims, took a while for him to get caught. Gacy, 33 victims, took him years to get caught. All those guys were smart and they were able to elude to a certain extent. But most killers, and like there was a quote from Ted Bundy, and I don't remember it verbatim, but it was basically like, when you commit your first, murder or, small handful, like you remember everything down to the T. You remember where you put the weapon and where, this was. And then by the time you get so many, you get careless and you get complacent.
Yeah.
And you forget to pick up the fucking crowbar that you beat this girl to death with. And you leave evidence at the scene. And that's how a lot of killers end up getting sloppy, is because they get so confident that like, oh, I've killed 10 people and nobody even fucking knows a thing. So like they get cocky and they think like, oh, no one's ever going to catch me. And then they get sloppy and then they get caught. So,
well, I mean, I think there's been, and just in my lifetime, I've known this a lot, but along with the cockiness comes like a bragging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you brag to the wrong person, Yeah. And that could get somebody thinking, some little ball rolling, and next thing you know, you're on the top 5. I can't remember the word. Most looked at for the crime.
Right. The suspect.
Yeah, the suspect.
Yeah. And a lot of serial killers too, I think, in some way or another, at some point or another, want to get caught because they want that notoriety. They become so prolific, like guys that have killed dozens, they become so prolific in their crimes that like, they're like, well, I'm doing all this shit. I'm fucking, the world knows about my crimes, but they don't know who I am. And a lot of these guys were just straight up fucking losers. So they have nothing else, to really like brag about in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I think guys like BTK, I think BTK wanted to get caught. He got caught so sloppily. He was messaging the police and was like, if I send you a floppy disk full of this, can you trace it? And they were like, no. And then he did it and they traced it right back to him immediately. I think and then, when he was on trial, he pled guilty. He didn't try to argue anything. He told specific details about everything he did.
Yeah.
And then, I think he's one of those guys that brags to a certain extent. And So yeah, I definitely think there's guys that wanted to get caught and wanted that notoriety. And then like, you got guys like Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman. He was a hitman / serial killer, but he gets caught decades after, the majority of his crimes are committed, and he ends up doing a whole HBO special called The Iceman Confesses, where he's talking extensively about these crimes. I think a lot of his were exaggerated, and I think that he admitted or claimed to have killed more than he actually did, just to like boost his level. Like, this is all I'm ever going to be known for, so let's fucking go big.
Yeah, exactly.
So, so it's like, yeah, I killed 200 people. It's like, but did you? Maybe it was only like 20 or 50 or whatever, but I'm going to spike it up just so that I'm like the fucking biggest and baddest that there ever was, because that's all you're ever going to be known for. So why not?
Well, yeah, I mean,
I'm already in jail for the rest of my life or on death row. What the fuck's it going to matter if I confess to 20 or 200 at that point?
Yeah.
You have the rep of that many kills. So,
and that would probably be more than anybody in the world.
Right, exactly. Which, I mean, if being a hitman, I'm sure his numbers are up there, but were they up there as far as he says that they are?
It all depends. I mean, on what era and what.
Yeah. I mean, that was during like that 70s, 80s time. He was working for, he was basically a free agent for multiple crime families in the New York and New Jersey area there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely feasible that he could have, but there's never been any evidence to back that. Right.
And then, if you look back even like the early days of the mafia and everything, 40s and 50s, the hitmen they used then, and hell, they had Tommy guns. They just go by and just blast the crap out of everybody,
Right. And then there's also always that argument too. It's like, are you a gangster or are you a serial killer?
Yeah. I mean, you've got a line there.
There is, and it's a weird line because it's kind of like, well, you're killing, kind of random people for, but you have it, but it's for
business.
Most serial killers, it's based on like it's like sex killings. It has something sexual to do with it. That stuff, that's like kind of like a business thing in a sense. It's like, well, this guy, he's fucking with my territory, my business, so we gotta get rid of him. Whereas
we gotta whack him.
We gotta get or this guy's gonna snitch on us for this or this, so we gotta get rid of him.
Yeah.
There is a difference, and you have your serial killers, you have your spree killers, you have your your mass murderers and stuff like that. So there's all these different categories to put these guys in. And like Richard Kuklinski, he's one that I get into debates with all the time about, because people are always like, he wasn't a serial killer, he was a hitman. And it's like, yes, he was a hitman, but he killed more than 3 people before he ever murdered somebody for money.
Right.
Serial killer, right? He admitted to going to, like, he would go into Central Park and he would find homeless people and just like experiment. Like, I'm going to shoot this one with a crossbow. I'm going to stab this one to death. What's the most effective way to kill somebody so that when I'm doing this for a hired hit, that it can be more effective than others? And what's going to cause somebody more pain, this or that? Because, people are like, yeah, take this guy out, make it quick. Or, hey, this guy did this, I want it slow and painful. So he would, experiment. He was a serial killer. He killed his first victim when he was 13 years old. He beat his bully to death. They never found the guy until he confessed to all his other crimes. Like, you know, so he's both. He was, yes, of course he was a hitman, but he was also a serial killer because he killed more than 3 people before he was ever doing hits for hire. So.
Yeah, but I mean, you could also argue the fact that he was in training.
You could, but yes, you could, but with all those experiments, yeah. But all 3, I mean, he wasn't in training to be a hitman when he was 13 years old and beat that kid to death.
No, that was
he was going to get linked up with the mob at one point or another and start, these guys were going to be like, hey, we'll pay you to do this shit. He didn't know that. He didn't know that during those first few. No way.
When did he start, like, age-wise, doing it for pay?
mid-20s, I want to say mid-20s, early 30s.
Okay, so you got 13 to 20.
Right.
I mean, that's a lot of years to be
Doing whatever you're doing.
yeah, you know. So yeah, I'd say he was a serial killer and just real good for it.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Hold on. You froze up there a little bit. There we go.
I freeze all the time.
Yeah, it's all good. But
I can get a blanket.
what's that?
I can get a blanket and unfreeze.
Yeah, we don't need that here in Florida, I'll tell you that. But yeah, there's a lot of discussion about that line between hitman and serial killer, and it's just you got to look at how many they killed that weren't for pay.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I can see the argument. I mean, really.
Yeah. Yep.
That's what's wild. Okay. Most serial killers have an age group.
Mm-hmm.
Why do they have an age group?
That age group is usually your 20s.
Right.
That's usually not everyone. You know, you can't lump everybody into that category, but a lot of them, it was 20s and 30s. I think that age group is just like it's when their violent tendencies really start to become prevalent. I think it's when they kind of figure out who they are and figure out what certain things that make them tick, and then they get to a point where they want to start experimenting certain things. I don't know if it has something going back to like that brain development thing.
Well, that's why I was asking the question. I was curious about that because most age range of the serial killers, you're looking at also higher testosterone levels. You're looking at breeding aspects, because most of them, like you said, were sexual.
Correct. Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm just thinking. That's all I'm doing.
Yeah, I think it's something where, like, you kind of start as like a person. You kind of start to peak in that age range.
Yeah.
Like you're really figuring out who you are, the things that you like, the things that you dislike. I think like guys like Dahmer. He knew he was gay for a long time, and he had urges for a long time, and some of these guys, they start early. Like Dahmer, he killed his first victim when he was like 17 or 18, and then he went several years without killing again. But once he started to kill again, that was kind of like he had these urges that never went away. I think he killed his first one and was like, fuck, I can never do that again, I'm gonna get caught.
Yeah.
And the urges just overtook him completely, and he ended up doing it again. And then you do a couple, you get away with them, you get more confident to be able to keep doing this. And I think some of it too, like Gacy was one where his first murder, so he says, and I think it's believable. Gacy was full of shit about a lot. I mean, Gacy denied murdering anybody except his first victim. He admitted to murdering this guy. All the others, he said, I didn't kill these guys. But the first victim, basically, he was, Gacy was bisexual, admittedly was bisexual. His wife was out of town, and he had met some guy, had him over. The guy, they had consensual sex. He stayed over. And in the morning, the guy woke up before Gacy and was making him breakfast. And he came in to wake Gacy up to be like, hey, breakfast is ready. And the guy still had a knife in his hand from when he was cooking. Right. Gacy woke up, saw a guy standing over him with a knife, freaked out, tackled the guy, ended up getting the knife from him and stabbing him. And what basically happened when that happened is like Gacy, more or less, not to be too vulgar, like fucking came in his pants and realized like, holy shit, like murder sexually arouses me.
Wow.
And that was like the beginning of the end for him, because he was like, he had all these violent urges and everything, but it wasn't until he actually took a life where he was like, holy shit, like this was the major sexual rush.
Yeah.
And then from there, it just spiraled from there.
Yeah. The damn walls broke right then.
Correct. So there, I think, there's guys like him where, yeah, they might have these urges, but they ignore them, or they put them off, and they say, no, that's not right. But then something ends up happening, and they can't control it anymore, and they realize, like, holy shit, like, I actually, like, I enjoy this. This is my thing.
Yeah.
So, I don't
Well,
know.
I mean, Gacy and Dahmer, didn't they target more like 16 to 18-year-olds?
Yeah, they had a younger male, demographic with their victims.
Yeah.
Some of them were minors, some of them weren't. In both cases, I know Dahmer, there was one as young as like 14. I think Gacy, there was one as young as about the same age, and then they both had ones that were in their mid to late 20s as well. So it was definitely in that same age range. And then there were several similarities with those two, and kind of a really weird random one was that the day Gacy was executed was the same day that Dahmer was baptized in prison.
Wow.
Yeah, May 10th, 1994. Pretty crazy. Pretty crazy. I actually have a book. Hold on, I'll show you real quick. I have Jeffrey Dahmer's Prison Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And it's on the inside. Hold on. This cover sheet always gets stuck together. But on the inside here, you can see that it's signed by Jeff.
Yeah.
And then inside this was a letter that he wrote basically about wanting to be baptized.
Wow.
So, so he became very religious. I think a lot of it was his dad was like kind of pushing him to be more religious and seek forgiveness for everything he did. But he was like actively looking for somebody to baptize him. And he was in correspondence with this lady that this letter was written to, that I found a bunch of other letters in all this stuff that I just got, that he was corresponding with her. And she ended up sending like everything that he sent her. She sent back to Lionel, Jeff's dad, after Jeff passed away. But this Bible was in Jeff's cell when he was murdered, so his dad got it. And then there was this letter that Lionel eventually ended up getting back, and it says, hey, it thanks her for sending him this specific Bible. And then he goes on to talk about how he's trying to get baptized, but doesn't know how they're going to do it in prison. They need a tub, this and that.
Yeah.
And the other. So just kind of, that was kind of a sidebar, but just a very interesting, like what are the odds that the same day that this notorious serial killer is executed, that this other notorious serial killer was baptized on the exact same day?
Yeah, I mean, that's
Very
just
synchronicity.
Well, I mean, that was one of the other questions I have for you, because I was always curious about this.
Mm-hmm.
Did serial killers study each other?
I think so.
I think they had like a one that they would idolize.
Yeah.
That's what I would think.
100%. Especially like in the later days, like maybe not like the real early ones when there wasn't a whole lot of information like public and stuff was harder to get a hold of. But guys that came a little bit later, like Bundy, Gacy, Dahmer, Ramirez, I think 100%. Like I know Gacy read a lot of like true crime magazines when he was a kid. I believe Ramirez did too. Bundy, I think all those guys, I don't know if they so much like idolized them in a sense. I'm sure to some extent, but I think a lot of them, they would study him to be like, okay, how'd he get caught?
Yeah.
How'd he get away with things for so long? And then what ended up causing him to get caught? I think so for sure. And there was a guy, a recent one, Israel Keys. He was caught, I think, in like the early 2000s, but he like admittedly like said that he idolized Ted Bundy. Like Ted Bundy was his hero. So yeah, definitely. I think they had to have, any information that these guys had about other serial killers. I think they were looking into it more so of like tactics of how to avoid getting caught, how to blend into society, because these guys were really good at doing that. They were really good at blending into society and coming off as like normal people. I think that they based like pretty much their whole lives around trying to be normal and trying to just seem to come off as like what society, wouldn't look into them as much. So,
Right.
going to college and being into politics and law and just, and just being active in like, like Gacy, active in like politics, active in the community and all that.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I know I'm a monster, but how do I keep people from suspecting that I'm a monster?
yeah. Well, I mean, Gacy dressed up as like a child's clown and did a lot of stuff with children, balloons, all kinds of stuff.
yeah, he went to the children's hospitals dressed as Pogo the clown. The one of the paintings behind me here.
Yeah.
That's Pogo. That's his that's how he dressed, and he would go to children's hospitals and parties sometimes and just entertain kids.
Yeah.
And yeah, just and he was like he would put on the big parades in Chicago, and he was very active in the community. So that when he was suspected of all these things, there were so many people that were like, John, nah. No way, not a chance.
Not John, no.
Yeah, this guy's he's got this business. He helps people out, with this and that. He's big into politics. He does all this shit for the community. He would hold like these massive parties at his house, like themed parties every year on holidays, and like people would dress up, come to his house. He'd have like everybody who's anybody in the community would be there. He knew how to blend in. Like he knew what he was doing. He knew how to blend in. He knew how to manipulate people into thinking that he was just this great guy. That they can never suspect him of any wrongdoing.
And the whole time he's got a whole basement full of dead bodies.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing is like while he's having these parties at his house, he's got 27 bodies under his crawl space. He's got another several in his yard. These people are partying on top of graves, basically. Yeah. Yeah. And there, I've been looking into this. There's been a theory for a long time that Gacy had accomplices, but it's always been up in the air about who his accomplices were. There were two of his workers, the guys that worked for his contracting company, that were that were living with him, and they were digging holes in his crawl space for him. My thought has always been, these two, like in both of them, they were very shady characters. They weren't like stand-up model citizens. Like one of them had felonies and that kind of stuff and violent history. And I think 100% that they were, I don't know if they were involved in the crimes, but I think that they were helping him. They were either luring victims to him in exchange for money. And, because they even admitted on trial that they were helping him. They were the ones digging the holes in the crawl space because John was too big to fit into that crawl space. He was too big.
I mean, yeah, he was a good sized guy,
Yeah, he was. And they always speculated, how was he getting down there and digging these deep trenches down there? And they admitted that they were down there digging, and but that they, he would flip out if they went off of where he said to dig. They said that they were dumping hundreds of pounds of lime down there as well. And it's like, how do you not know? How are you down there digging and you don't come up? There's 27 bodies down there, for fuck's sake. Like, how do you not at some point come across a bone or some sort of, tissue that's been, decomposed and gelatinized, like,
exactly.
and the smell alone, like how, I don't understand. I don't buy that for a second. I think they were definitely helping him. And then there's also been more recent speculation too into something a lot bigger, like an actual child sex trafficking ring that was happening there, because there was, if you've ever heard of a serial killer named Dean Corll.
No, I haven't actually.
He and Gacy actually, he got some of his methods from their crimes were really similar. The same ages. He had younger guys luring victims to him. He was burying them under like a shipping container. It was just like the crimes themselves, like the way he was killing them, the torture he was committing on them before killing them. It was all extremely similar. And they found Dean Corll was connected to this guy who was basically like the Jeffrey Epstein of his time. He had this massive child sex trafficking ring.
Right.
And, like the police looked into him, and they found his list of clients, and it was like 50,000 people, and a lot of like really like prevalent names in politics and celebrities and that kind of shit. And for, just as it is, the police just kept losing all this evidence, and the guy would walk. But they found connections of Gacy to this guy as well. So there's been a lot of recent speculation, and I don't know if I'm 100% convinced of it, but it's definitely something to look into, that this guy was like Gacy was basically just like kind of the scapegoat, that there was a bigger picture to all this shit, and that there was this child sex trafficking ring going on, and that, you know, Gacy was involved in politics. There were a lot of politicians that were presumably on this list, and
Yep.
again, like that list just disappeared, and you know, we'll probably never know for sure, but it's definitely raises some questions, if like, because it does make you think, like, how did he have that many bodies under his crawl space for that long with no eyebrows getting raised?
You know, and plus, you know, like we talked about the parties and everything he threw.
Yep.
There had to be a smell. There had to be something.
Right.
You know, you just.
I mean, that's eventually how he got caught, is because he was suspected of this kid's disappearance, and he was being tailed by the cops because the kid was last seen talking to Gacy. So they're like, okay, we're going to look into Gacy. So he was being followed. Gacy ends up inviting them into the house, and the one goes and uses the bathroom, flushes the toilet, the heater kicks on, and he gets hit with the smell of decomposition, and that leads to a further search of the house. Because they searched his house initially, but they never went into the crawl space. They found some weird shit, but they never went down there. Well, then that Fed was in there. He smelled what he smelled. That was how they got the second. And they were just looking for one kid.
Yeah.
For one kid that disappeared. And can you imagine, like, you're down there digging and you're just like, oh, here's a left femur. Here's another left femur. Here's another left femur. What the fuck? Like, we've got, you know, and then it just like spiraled from there. It's just like they ended up pulling 27 bodies out from that little crawl space. Like, that's fucking insane.
Yeah, because that wasn't a big house.
No, it was a ranch house. I think it was like 1,700 square feet.
Yeah.
The house is like 1,900 square feet, ranch house. And I'm like thinking, like, I live in Florida, so we don't have crawl spaces or basements here. But I'm thinking, like, yeah, that's not a big space. And it didn't cover the entire square footage of the house. Yeah. I think that crawl space only covered like one half, and then like the outer kind of like porch area.
That's insane, man.
Yeah, they had to dig up all the floors in that house just to exhume the whole crawl space.
Well, yeah, and you know, and now you got this whole theory going in my head with the traffic ring and everything, and I'm just like,
I'll send you a podcast about that. Who was it? Murder in America. They did a podcast recently. They did like a 4-part podcast about John Wayne Gacy, about his crimes. Like, they covered him extensively, and then I think it was the last episode, they talked about like the conspiracy theories about Gacy. And that was one of the theories. And I had heard this theory before. They went like deep into it, and it was actually really good. Like, after listening to it, I was like, holy fuck, these people are onto something. Like, they did a really good job of like detailing this guy that was running this sex trafficking ring, the exact methods that he was, you know, using to do it. The people that were involved, how Dean Corll was involved, and then how John Wayne Gacy was allegedly involved, and what ended up happening to that guy. It was very interesting, for sure. Definitely raises some questions, like, this could be something, you know?
Yeah, because that's and you know, and that's something I've always heard, that the main guy was always like the major leader, and he would always have 1 or 2 understudies,
scapegoats, basically. Yeah.
Yes. You know, and they would help. They would do the biggest majority of all of it, and he was just there for the sex part.
Correct.
And the torture part, and you know, and then he would leave, and they got the spoils, I guess you could say.
Right. They were responsible for getting rid of them.
Yeah, after they had their fun.
Right, correct. Because they were paying. Like, a lot of these people on this list were millionaires.
Yeah.
Just like with the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing. Like, we still obviously haven't seen his client list, and we never will, because that shit's being brushed under the rug to an extensive level. But you know, there was a lot of very rich people on that list based on you knew, like, admittedly was out on his island. So it was kind of the same thing. Like I said, he was like the Jeffrey Epstein of his time. So you got these guys that are like, here's $100,000. I'm going to do this, and this to this kid. You guys have to clean it up.
Yeah.
Because he's paying for that service. He's paying for them to get rid of it, you know, and make sure that it never comes back to any of them.
Well, that's, you know, another thing that fascinated me. There was like a code, I don't know, with some of these guys. The people that they targeted or actually killed were in a certain age range.
Mhm.
But then when you got over to Dahmer and Gacy, they became younger.
What do you mean? Like they became younger?
Well, like they're,
The victims?
yeah, the victims, and some of the older
Mhm.
serial killers and everything, they kept the age range of the victims around close to what they were, if I'm correct in this.
Yeah, some of them, and I think a lot of that too just kind of goes back on who's a pedophile and who's not.
Right.
Like guys like Ridgway and Kemper, they never killed anybody that was underage.
Right.
Um, so they didn't have pedophilic or tendencies. Dahmer
Right.
obviously did because he had several underage victims. Gacy obviously did; he had many. Guys like that. But yeah, I think really what separates that is who was a pedophile and who wasn't.
Yeah,
Because
and that's
not
what I
every
was getting
serial
to.
killer was a pedophile. But I think too, because that's a hard one because I feel like a lot of these guys get to the point where it doesn't matter how old they are, they need to kill.
Right.
And
Well,
it's
like,
you can get. Like I think Dahmer was like killing mostly people his age that he met out at the gay bar, but then I think there were a couple where he was just like so driven by his fucking tendencies
yeah,
that he didn't give a fuck how old. He didn't care if it was a 60-year-old or a 5-year-old. He just needed to fucking kill somebody.
yeah,
So it kind of, I'm not saying he wasn't a pedophile either or, because clearly they were pedophiles. They had sex, they raped and killed children. They're pedophiles, no matter
right.
what. But
Exactly.
I think it did get to that point where they were just in such like a state that they just their tendencies and their urges took over that they would kill anybody that that somewhat fit the criteria. They just
Right. And
get the release.
and that's kind of what I was getting to because to me, you go back to Jack the Ripper. Now he only killed women of the night.
Right.
But it didn't really say what age range the victims were.
True.
You're thinking back then, okay, that age range would be
12-year-old back in those days. So,
yeah.
like, yeah.
That's what I'm saying,
Yeah, right.
And then, because I don't know, it's kind of like I need a subcategory, serial killer, pedophile, regular serial killer.
Right.
And it's like, I don't know, it just makes you wonder, really.
Yeah.
And that's what got in my head a while ago when we were talking about age range and all that other stuff. And I was just like, okay, how many of them were kids? How many of them were who had somewhat of a moral compass,
right,
not to target children?
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I've thought about that before, but I'm thinking about it harder now that you're, kind of bringing it up to me. And I think it's hard to say because, guys like Dahmer, going back to Dahmer and Gacy again, like not all their victims were kids.
Yeah.
So if you're a pedophile specifically, I would assume, and I'm not a psychologist, I'm not, any,
No.
yeah, but I'm just kind of assuming that if you're a pedophile, all your victims are going to be children.
Exactly.
And if you're not a pedophile, you wouldn't think there'd be any victims, but then just kind of going back to what I just said about like, they probably got to the point where they were just like, whoever I can get my hands on, I just need to kill someone.
Yeah.
So it's like, were they actually like specifically a pedophile, or did they just have a few victims that were kids?
Right. But you don't hear that breakdown. You don't hear that separation. The only thing you hear is
who's a child
killer.
Yeah.
He's just a killer.
Yeah. Right.
And I think it needs to be brought to light more of who actually was a pedophile.
Right.
And who was just a regular killer.
Yeah.
Because to me, I mean, honestly, that's two different mentalities right there, dude.
Mm-hmm. And once again, I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, but like I've always thought that, if you're a pedophile, like you're your demographic, like what you're attracted to is just kids. Like you're not attracted to people your age or older than you or anybody that's even of age. You're attracted to children and that's it.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're not a pedophile, you're like, oh, that's fucking disgusting, like how you and I would think. But yeah, it's hard because that's a thinker for sure, man. It's like, were these guys pedophiles or did they just happen to have a few victims that were kids? Like same like Bundy, like he was another one. Like most of his victims were in their mid-20s, like early to mid-20s, sometimes a little older. But then he had like 2 random ones that were like 14 or 15 years old.
Yeah, but they were just random.
Correct. They were like, oh, there's this girl, he liked younger girls with brown hair, not children. That wasn't his thing, but they grabbed him and killed him to satisfy his urge.
Yeah, because I mean, I can speak from experience. 18 years old with a nice car and meeting a girl or something like that and go out on a date. You're in the middle of the date and you find out, oh crap, she ain't 17, 18. She's freaking 14 or 13 because she lied.
Right.
So that's what makes me wonder.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, the 2 younger ones,
their age.
The 2 younger ones could have lied.
Correct. You have people that look older and more mature than they actually are. And then you have people that look like they're children.
Yeah.
So if you're in that situation where, you're kind of looking at somebody and you're just like, oh yeah, like, she's late, 18, 19, 20, maybe even 21. And then come to find out, you were lied to and she's way underage and you're like, fuck, that's not a good situation for anybody to be in.
No. And it could have targeted a rage too,
What's that?
It could have set off a rage too.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. It could have been, what? You're telling me you lied? You're only fucking 14. I'm going to go to fucking jail now. And then they kill him.
Yeah. Whereas I just turned around and took him home and dumped him their butt off.
Right. Yeah. But then they could still say that you did whatever you did to him.
Yeah, exactly.
I was 14 and he still did it anyway. And even though you never, necessarily touched them, it's like, and then you go to jail for life. So then some of these guys, people that have been in that situation probably panic and they're like, I got to kill this fucking person. Like, I got to kill this kid because either way I'm going to fucking jail, even though I didn't do anything wrong.
Oh yeah. And
it'll look bad. So let's get rid of them.
There's so many aspects to all of it, really. I mean, it's just.
I had a friend, not to get like too off topic, but I had a friend whose career, he was a musician and his whole career was ruined over that. He met a girl while he was on tour who, he was like 21 or 22 at the time. And she lied and told him that she was, 19 or 20 and she was only 17. And, they never did anything physical, but there was, the sexting and everything involved. And then come to find out, she puts him on blast and says, oh yeah, he's been texting me this whole time doing this and that. And I'm underage, and they ruined his whole fucking career. And he was like, I didn't know. I asked her when we met, like, how old are you? And she said, I'm fucking 20 years old. So, it's like you got to ask for IDs when you're in that status, because that can ruin your whole fucking career.
Well, I mean, after 3 divorces, I've been single now for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And people, they laugh at me when I tell them this. But if I ever was to actually start dating somebody, look, I want background check. I want your credit score. I want your physical chart from your doctor. Because you don't know anymore, man.
Yeah.
And people lie nowadays.
Right.
Like they're, second nature,
Yeah.
There's no thought about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's shitty. I've never been in that type of situation, but I do know people that have, and it's just ugly all around, So anything you can do to avoid that, especially if you're somebody that, that's got a lot to lose.
Yeah.
That simple thing, like you might not know, but it happened and it is what it is. And guess what? You're fucked now.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, if nothing else, the integrity of who I am.
Right. Exactly.
That means more to me than anything.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Everything else is just stuff, man. It's just stuff.
Yeah. Right.
Except for your wall. Your wall's a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, it's some heavy stuff for sure.
Oh yeah. Because I'm like, I can't remember, because you are one of the top collectors from what I understand. I went with this view because I got more of your wall behind you.
I've got other walls too. This is just the main one. There's a bunch of other stuff. I got a few things on the table here. Yeah, so it's kind of like my own little museum.
Yeah, we got to get started into your collective stuff here, man.
Right on. You mind if I take quick break? Real quick?
Dude, you can go ahead.
All right. I'll be right. I'm just going to use
it. Thing.
Right on. I'll return.
But yeah, y'all, this is really cool because there's two John Wayne Gacy paintings right there, I believe, and I think they're numbered. And this is the cool stuff about it, because this is one reason why I wanted to do this show, because a lot of people out there have a fascination with this stuff and the horror and the serial killer. And like he said, there's several serial killer podcasts that do nothing but this stuff, and it's cool as all get out. I like it every now and then. It's not something I could do all the time, but it's cool as all get out. And like I said, that's why I put all this on. Yeehaw. No, I didn't stop recording.
What's up?
I did not stop recording.
No, that's all right. I just needed to stretch my legs for a minute. Get up. But yeah.
We could have done jumping jacks.
Say again?
We could have done jumping jacks together or something. I mean.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to do burpees, push-ups, we can. I used to be a personal trainer, so
Yeah. Well, in case you ain't noticed, his mouth is bulging more than anything else. So I need to get back into it.
Yeah.
But yeah, while you was gone, I was just kindly stating that.
Yeah, I was right there. I heard.
The two that I noticed the most was the two clowns with the John Wayne, and if I believe correctly, they're numbered.
Yes, yeah, they are. If you want, I'll pull one off the wall and just kind of show you. So this was, obviously you can see I have two of the same Pogo the Clown paintings.
Mm-hmm.
This was an earlier one. That one, the camera's reversed, so I don't even know where I'm pointing. That one, everything's opposite with this camera. I don't know, but that one is one of his later ones. So this was number. He had two different numbers that he'd put on most of his paintings, not all of them, but the ones that he did a lot of, he would use. His first set of numbers was to indicate how many paintings he had done total to that date. And then there would be a dash, and then there'd be a second set of numbers. And that was how many of this specific painting that he did. So with that being said, this one here is number 667-48. So this was the 48th Pogo that he ever did. And I'll just show you the back there. He signed it, titled it Pogo the Clown, and then he numbered it. And then he taped that picture of himself on there as well. And I've never taken it off, but I've, kind of peeled back at it a little bit. And you can see he signed the back of that and dated it on that photograph too. So he would do that a lot. He would tape price sheets and his letters if they were going to somebody specific to the backs. He would put pictures like that of himself. He would write notes right on the canvas on a lot of them as well. So yeah.
I noticed a difference in between those two. Mm-hmm. The balloons are different.
The balloons, yep.
The different colors on the balloons.
Yep.
And the background behind the trees, the skyline on that one is lighter than the other one. Yeah,
so he switched it up a little bit. Not every single one was always
it's like subtle stuff.
Yeah, like he would change how the trees were. He would change, sometimes he would use more of a bluish in the sky. Sometimes the sky was just like the color of the canvas, more or less. This one, you can see the trees have a lot more detail in them.
Yeah.
There's some different color greens and browns in there. Whereas that, it's one color throughout. They're very, very simple. You can definitely tell that in the early days, like his early paintings, like this one, he took his time quite a lot more. He put more work into them. And then once he was getting more popular and there was a lot more demand for his paintings, he was kind of just trying to crank them out as fast as he could. So those little details kind of got lost.
Now, is that something he did at his house, or was that one of the ones he did in prison?
No, these he never really did any artwork pre prison. So all these paintings you see were done by him when he was on death row in Correctional Institute in Illinois. So yeah, he never. I've heard that he did like a tiny little bit of basic art before prison, but nothing crazy. He, a lot of people say like when you're in prison, obviously there's not a lot to do, especially if you're on death row, because death row inmates more or less are confined to the cell 23 hours a day. So inmates will find God or they'll find artwork. Gacy found artwork. And he basically, that's all he did. He did over almost 2,500 paintings.
Wow.
Death row between 1978 and when he was executed in 1994. He didn't even start painting. I think it was until like 1980, 1981 was when he first started. So yeah, he didn't get into it till then. And like in that between 1980 and 1994, 2,500 paintings. That's a lot of paintings to crank out, especially if you're on death row. Your supplies are limited. You're basically relying on people to send you the supplies you need to paint, and all that. And his paintings really weren't bad. Like I have quite a few that were actually really nicely done, like his Seven Dwarfs ones you see behind me here.
I heard that. Anna, my daughter Anna, was telling me that he had the Seven Dwarfs thing. He had Pogo the Clown thing, and she said he more or less concentrated on those.
Yeah. He said that his favorite thing to paint was Disney characters.
Yeah.
He was real big into painting Disney characters for the early days. That's pretty much what he started off doing, and kind of worked his way up from there. And then eventually there was a guy named Rick that got involved who was helping. He was basically his art dealer. Right. And Rick was the one that was kind of pushing John to do more dark things, like skulls. And as you can see up there in that corner, there's it's a Hollywood Monsters painting. I'll pull it down and show you, but it's basically horror movie characters. So he was pushing him to do more stuff like this.
Yeah.
And because people wanted, they wanted the dark stuff that people were like, oh, well, if I'm getting a painting from a serial killer, I want something creepy, like a skull or a horror character or something like that. We don't want a Disney character from this guy. We want something to kind of match the man. So like I said, his art dealer was kind of the one pushing him to really do some of the creepier shit. But
to me though, him doing Pogo the Clown and the Seven Dwarfs and the Disney stuff, really, it takes like just a second to think, and you realize, holy crap, that's darker than anything else.
Right.
Because this is the mind of a serial killer. That's sick and twisted.
It is, and there's a lot of theories about his Seven Dwarf paintings in general, that they have some macabre and dark meanings and representations behind them. Let me pull one off the wall and just kind of give you an example.
It's a good thing you didn't come out here. You'd had to have a U-Haul.
Oh, right. Yeah, I got a lot of shit, man. So like this is one of his he did 5 different variations of the Seven Dwarfs paintings. I have all 5 of them. They're actually my favorite ones. I love his Seven Dwarf paintings. But basically the theory is that this guy here, Doc, he was the older of the dwarves with the glasses and the beard, that he represented Gacy, and that all the younger boy dwarves were representing of his victims.
Right.
Now, there's also theories behind these Hi-Ho paintings specifically about that they're representations of certain crimes. Like this one in specific, there's a river. People say like, oh, well, his last few victims he dumped in the river, so that, and it was, in the winter. He was arrested in December, I believe. That was based on that. There's this one up right above me that's Hi-Ho in the mines, and that one
Right.
they're coming out of a cave with pickaxes and shovels and lanterns, and it's like, okay, they're coming from burying people in the crawl space.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of different things people have theorized about these paintings, but I think it's definitely probably holds some weight. I think I think
Yeah, I do. I mean,
kind of sick, twisted mind. Where he had a painting that it was called Death Witch, and it was a reaper, and he only did 33 of them.
interesting.
One
Where's
for each
that?
victim, a reaper.
Where's it at?
Oh, I don't have it.
You ain't got it?
No, I used to have one, and then I got offered like a ridiculous amount of money for it, so I sold it.
All right, we got to get into that because you brung it up. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
My daughter had one of them, and
Mhm.
you got it from her.
I did. Yep.
And she was telling me about the prices of a lot of this stuff. And now, folks, we're just talking about Gacy alone with his paintings. And I was just astounded at the prices on these things. Now, is that price solely on because it was Gacy?
Yeah, mostly. It depends too, because like I have one of his old price, like he had price sheets when he was in prison.
Right.
Like how much everything was being sold for. So like one of these Hi-Ho paintings, like $150 at the time. Pogos were like 100. Some of the smaller, more basic ones that didn't have as many colors, they were like 75 or 50. That one above me there, the Hi-Ho in the mines, that was one of like his first of that painting, and it even marked on the back, it said $50. But yeah, so over the years, especially since he's died and there's no more being cranked out, a lot of them have been destroyed. There was one of the victims' family members got a hold of a fuckload of them and burned them in the streets in Chicago.
Wow.
So there's 2,500 ish before. Now, it's hard to say just how many are still out there. I'd say maybe 500 to 800, maybe, because you got to think things getting destroyed in fires, estates, people that had them that died, and their houses get cleared out and people don't know what they are and they just get tossed. So you got to factor in a lot of stuff like that. But with that being said, generally a John Wayne Gacy painting, depending on what painting it is, these days goes for between $2,000 and all the way up to $8,000.
Wow.
I've moved quite a few of these. I obviously collect them myself, but I've also, I come across them all the time because doing what I do, people find my website and they email me, and like I get emails every week about people wanting to sell their shit. Like, hey, I got a Gacy painting, or hey, I've got all this Dahmer stuff. Like, I just inheritance, not the right word, obtained a fuckload of Dahmer stuff.
Wow.
And it was just because people find my website and they email me saying, hey, I've got this, that, and the other. Do you want to buy it? Do you want to sell it for me? And you take a cut, whatever. And I do all that. So I've moved shit in the last 4-5 years. I've probably moved between 50 and 100 Gacy paintings.
Wow.
And yeah, that's usually depending on the painting. The price that they go for is roughly between that 2,000 to 8,000 mark. The 8,000, that's going to be more like rare ones that he only did a couple of, because like these pogos behind me here, like this one over here, that one is number like 295. So right. He did like 3, and that wasn't his last pogo. So he did over 300 pogos alone. So like, yeah, pogos are definitely the most sought after. Usually when somebody wants a Gacy painting and they get a hold of me, it's like, hey, I want a pogo the clown. So yeah, those are those are the popular ones, but they're also one of the easiest to find. These Hi-Ho paintings are incredibly hard to find. It took me years to find all 5 of them.
Wow.
And because he only did, I think, 30 or so of each. And then there's ones that he only did 1 of. It was literally like a one and done type thing. Those ones always stretch, higher prices. So,
I mean, if he did the Hi-Ho ones, like you said, did he do them the same way as he did the Pogos? Just a little bit of differences in each one.
Yeah. So
that kind of makes them unique, I mean, like one of one to me.
So some of them, yes, some of them, no. Like certain Hi-Hos he did, like the Hi-Ho in the winter behind me here, he would change up the color of the dwarves' clothing. Right. But as far as like the background and stuff, that all pretty much stayed the same. The one on top, the Hi-Ho in the mines, if you look at his price sheets, he actually advertises that there's no one alike. He changed them in some way, shape, or form. There was more than just the color of the dwarves. It was the trees. Like mine has a stream running through the background. I've never seen another one with the stream in the background.
Right.
When the caves looked different, there were different type of flowers in the front. There was multiple trees instead of just one big one or one big one and a small one. So those are all different, completely different. And I think the Hi-Ho in the falls, he changed up quite a bit too. I have one that's more unique than a lot of the other ones that I've seen out there, just based on the color of the leaves and everything. In the background, it's got like more of a darker blue, and it's on a bigger canvas. Most of them he just did on 16 by 20. That one is on an 18 by 24. So yeah, he would change some of them, and some of them they stayed the same. Like the campfire one behind me, right by my head, that one stayed the same. I've never seen one that they really had any significant difference other than the clothing colors.
I see. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah, it is. And he did a lot of commissions too. Like I just sold a painting recently that I sold it on behalf of somebody else, but it was a portrait that he did of one of his pen pals. His pen pal wrote to him and said, "Hey, I want you to paint me." And he painted him, and it was one of a kind. It was just a basic portrait. It was like I think he wrote a note on the back that said, I think it was like the 3rd or 4th portrait that he had ever done. And that was just like a one-off, not a super interesting one-off by any means, because it was just a portrait of some random guy that he was pen pals with. But it's still cool to see, because he did a lot of that. He did a lot of, somebody would write him and say, paint me, or paint my dog, or paint my dad, or paint my kids. Like there are people having him paint his kids, which is super fucking weird. I believe it's actually his art dealer, Rick. Rick has a painting that Gacy did of his kids.
Yeah.
Like Pogo the Clown sitting with his kid. I don't know, fucking weird, but
that's just weird.
No disrespect to Rick. Rick's a very interesting guy. I've talked to him quite a few times about this stuff. But yeah, a little bizarre, but to each their own. So yeah, and a lot of it too is just what the buyer's willing to pay. When it comes to artwork, certain pieces are worth more to say you than it would be to me.
Right.
Like one of these Hi-Hos, these are my favorite ones. The Hi-Ho series. I've been wanting all 5 of them forever. It took me years to get all 5 of them, but I finally have them. I wouldn't sell them for fucking anything, but like, to me, these Hi-Hos were worth $3,000 to $5,000. Now there might be another big Gacy collector out there that's like, yeah, I don't really give a shit about the Hi-Hos. I like the skull paintings.
Yeah.
So I'd only pay, $2,000 maybe for a Hi-Ho, but I'll pay $6,000 for a skull. So it's all based on what the buyer thinks it's worth and what it's worth to them.
See, I'm digging the 7 dwarfs thing.
They're cool
than the others. I think they're cooler.
They're really cool. He did, like I said, he did 5. He did the campfire, the mines, the winter, the fall, and the spring. So
wow,
yeah. Yep.
I think that's cooler. I mean, because if you go back through the movies, the Disney movies, you've seen them in each of those seasons.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And a lot of them he got, like, there's a few of them he took kind of like not the background, the scenery behind them, because he actually was really good at doing scenery, but the dwarves in general, like he took the way that they're positioned, he took those out of coloring books. He had Disney coloring books that he just took them out of and kind of like traced them onto the canvas and then painted the whatever background he was going to use. And then he kind of put them in the foreground, but he took their positioning and everything right from like one of those Disney coloring books.
Yeah, that's wild.
It is, yeah. I actually saw one of those Disney coloring books that belonged to him go up for sale a couple years ago, and it was signed by him. He had notes written throughout it. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, and in his own handwriting notes and everything else. I mean, yeah, I mean, I could see where that could be a big collector item.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, Gacy stuff sells very, very fast, especially the paintings. They're like, they're gone. Like as soon as I listen, they're gone, man.
What else did he have beside the paintings?
Not a lot. I mean, as far as like what he sold, that was it. He did have a book. I have a copy of it here. He wrote a book called Question of Doubt. This is it right here. And it was actually like very well presented. It's like leather bound and everything.
Oh, yeah.
And he, it's basically like 300, 400 pages of him trying to, say that he was innocent and all that. Nothing really interesting in it, but, he like on the inside, he signed, several of the copies that just said like, thanks for reading, yada, yada.
Yeah.
But, so he sold these at one point or another. Once he had these published and everything, he sold like 500 copies of those or so. And, but other than that, like now you can find other things that are for sale, like, those Disney books, like there's Bibles I've seen that he had, magazines that he signed, letters. Of course, he had tons of pen pals, so you always see letters of his. But that stuff, it's not super valuable. Like the letter, you see a John Wayne Gacy letter pop up, it usually, depending on the content and like what is said in the letter, $300 to $500 tops for one of those. So
that's still a lot of money to me. I
mean, yeah, and most of his letters he typed and just signed at the bottom, so it's not even like a fully handwritten letter anyway. But yeah, but on the spectrum of like prices as far as Gacy's items go, that's definitely on the lower because, like I said, the paintings go anywhere from $2,000 to $8,000. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So out of all the serial killers, stuff that you have come across, what was the most expensive item and which serial killer was it? And I just asked that priorly because I am curious as I'll get out how high this stuff can go.
The paintings are never cheap. I've gotten good deals on some of them, but for the most part, they're not super cheap. Most people don't believe I actually have these, and I haven't really advertised it a whole lot that I have them. I just, like I was telling you earlier, I recently acquired a bunch of Dahmer stuff.
Right.
And it's I'm going to be, there's a lot of it that's going to be up for sale. It's a lot of stuff that came from his father's house. His father's house currently being cleared out right now, and somebody close to him got a hold of me and had quite a few items that she was looking to get rid of, and I just happened to be the first one she emailed about it and was lucky enough to jump on it. I showed you that Bible was one of them. I have a whole binder here. I have his autopsy report. I've got loads of, like, a whole binder full of paperwork, and I haven't even gotten everything that I'm getting from this person yet. But the big item that I have, I'll show you, is a pair of his glasses.
Wow. Now, is that the ones he wore during the murders?
Undetermined. So this same person, I don't want to go too much into it because there's a lot of legal stuff behind it, but
I totally understand.
There's a pair of his glasses right now that are in a museum in your state. They came from the same thing.
What?
The pair that they have were his prison owned pair.
Okay.
Those were when he was in prison. These were from before that, just not 100% sure. I've gone through pictures and videos of him, and I've narrowed it down to when he was living with his grandmother. So I've found home videos of him when he was living there that Lionel Dahmer took of him, and just based on the style and the frames, they look identical to that. It's a little grainy, so it's hard to really match up. But the glasses that he was wearing when he was arrested, these are not them. I know that for sure because the bridge is completely different. And they weren't the glasses that he had when he was in high school or when he was in the military. So it was between when he got caught and between when he was living with his grandmother is when it came from. But yeah, very never thought I would have this. This is definitely the craziest item I own. And like I said, I've got loads of other stuff of his. I've got this book that was his when he was in prison that he signed on the inside. I have this Bible. I have tons of letters, all this legal paperwork. I have a ton of fan mail of his, just letters that people wrote to him when he was in prison. I have all of his prison mail, not all of it, but a bunch of it. So, and like I said, this is all coming directly from Lionel Dahmer's house. So you can't really question the authenticity of any of it. But of course, everybody's always, they're fake. That's not his real pair. They're in a museum. I'm like, well, the guy had more than one pair of glasses in his entire fucking life. Don't sit here and tell me that he only had one pair and that one pair is in a museum. He had glasses from when he was 5 years old to when he died. So
yeah, I mean, I've got 3 pairs of glasses just on my own right now. So I mean,
right, and these are staying in my collection probably forever. They're not for sale, so I don't really need to prove their authenticity to anybody. I know they're authentic, so that's all that I care. I've already had somebody offer me $20,000 for these, and I said no. So
wow,
yeah. So they're staying with me for quite a while. But
you've got a retirement package ahead of you.
I tell my wife that all the time. I'm like, one day, because these especially these paintings, they just keep going up in price. 5 years ago, these were maybe worth $1,000. Now they're worth, what I said they're worth, and so it just keeps going up. True crime is huge right now, so people.
Oh, yeah, it is. Well, I mean,
get your hands on this shit, and they're willing to pay pretty big bucks for it.
Well, it's like you said earlier, that one podcast, and when you took a stretch break, I was telling them, there are several podcasts out there that will cover front to back, start to finish, the whole 9 yards. And they're out there. Only thing they got to do is just look for them, you know?
Yeah, of course.
And I'm just, I mostly do just the entertainment industry and stuff. And I'm just like, man, I got to do a Halloween show. I got
Yeah.
I gotta do something that's cool, man.
yeah, something unique to kind of throw in the works, because even if your podcast isn't about true crime or serial killers or cult leaders or anything like that, there's still a lot of people that listen to you on a regular basis are going to like the change up in content and be like, wow, this is fucking interesting. I didn't even know this shit existed. So you reach a different audience. It might not be true crime enthusiasts in general, but then you might spark something in somebody that's going to be like, wow, this is cool. I'm going to get more into this. Maybe not to the extent that I am, but just to research it and get more into that stuff. It could spark an interest in some people too, that they didn't even know that they had. So
yeah, I mean, I just
want to talk about this kind of stuff with people that don't normally listen to this kind of stuff.
I think it's cool as all get out. I mean, I've learned so much just from listening to you and looking at the paintings of Gacy's and the stuff that you got from Dahmer. And I'm just like, man. But again, I did not realize until Anna got that first Gacy painting that there was actually a collective for all this stuff.
Yeah. And it's funny the demographic that you get too of the people that do collect it, because I get people that that you could guess oh yeah, no surprise he wants this, but then I have people that buy from me all the time that are dentists. I have a dentist that buys from me all the time. I have a surgeon that buys, you know what I mean? Just people that most people would think are more normal, that you would never guess would be into this kind of stuff, that spend thousands of dollars on it.
Oh yeah,
because it doesn't you don't have to be a fucking weirdo like myself to be into this kind of shit. It could be anybody. Like I mean, for fuck's sake, there were celebrities collecting Gacy's artwork.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Johnny Depp wrote to Gacy and got paintings from him. Marilyn Manson, that's not a shocker. Cal Ripken fucking had Gacy paint an Oriole for him, and they both signed it. It's up for sale on some site now for a ridiculous amount of money.
Okay, that one's a little bit of a shocker.
Yeah, no, Gacy did paintings for the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame and the Boxing Hall of Fame, and they're up there. You can find the pictures of them online, and they are what do you call it? All signed by fucking all the Hall of Famers, like Yogi Berra and shit, like all signed the one painting, and it's done.
Wow.
Bet you didn't know that. But
no, but
there's a lot of people that are into this shit that don't even know that. So
that is wild, man.
Hey, hold on 1 second. I gotta get a charger for this laptop. It's already about to die.
Well, we're almost at 2 hours, so
okay. I mean, if you want to wrap up here, you know.
Yeah, if you got some. I mean, I'm amazed at all the stuff you have, and we've just touched a tip of everything that I'm guessing you've got.
Yeah. I've got a lot more. I've got stuff from Bundy. I've got stuff from Eileen Wuornos. I've got I have this little necklace I just got here with this little pendant. It's a little 22 caliber bullet pendant, and it's got Eileen Wuornos's ashes in it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now I know what to get Anna for Christmas.
There you go. Yeah, these are actually for sale right now. A friend of mine got a hold of Eileen's best friend who had her ashes, and she recently sold them all, and they made these. They're selling for like $1,000 right now on murderauction.com. So yeah, you can get your hands on those. But yeah, I mean, we can always do a two-parter if you want to get more into the specific stuff, you know.
You know what?
I have so.
We might do that because this has been really, really fun and informative, and God, it's just awesome.
Yeah, I'm down. I'm down if you want to do another episode where we just kind of go straight into all the pieces that I have and talk about that, because I know we spent a good over an hour just talking about serial killers and cases in general before we even really got into this stuff. So
yeah, so I mean, it's we might do a two-parter.
Yeah, let me know, man. I'm totally down. I've enjoyed this. This has been great.
All right. I appreciate you. All right, y'all. We're going to get off here. And Jordan, stick around for a minute because I'm going to close the show out, and then I'm going to come right back to you. And we'll see if we can't figure out a good date for have a second part.
Sounds good.
All right, dude. I appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks.
All right. So, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this. We are going to do a part 2. So, this is going to be fun. And I hope everybody has learned something. And get your spooky on because I got more shows to come. All right. Remember, like, share, follow, subscribe. Jordan, what are your websites?
So my website is truecrimecollective.com. You can also follow me on social media. Instagram is @_truecrimecollective_, and then on TikTok @truecrimecollective. So yeah, follow me on there. I sell a lot of this stuff. I sell t-shirts with serial killers and other true crime stuff on them as well. And I have some collectibles, art prints, and that kind of thing. So a little bit of something for everybody if you're into this kind of weird shit. So
all right, y'all. We'll see y'all more later. Appreciate y'all. And Jordan, I'm gonna put you in the green room. Toodaloo, y'all.